The void was vast and indifferent, speckled with the cold glimmer of ancient stars. It had watched empires rise, fall, and vanish without concern. Among these celestial relics, the dead system of Kalor 9 drifted in silent defiance of time, uncharted, forgotten, and for good reason. It was a graveyard of something far older than any known civilization, an abyss where even the boldest dared not linger. The warship lay in its heart. It was a thing of impossible design, its surface shifting like black glass swallowing the starlight instead of reflecting it. The runes etched into its hull were not markings of war but something more, something alive, waiting. It did not belong to the galaxy's known histories, nor did it fit within the logic of its warring species. And yet, it woke. Humanity had not been invited to this part of the galaxy. They were tolerated, perhaps even humored, but never considered equals. In the grand theater of the galactic concordium, where ancient races dictated the fate of the cosmos, humans were a peculiar anomaly. Reckless, audacious, and altogether inconvenient. Their ships were crude compared to the elegant spires of the Zivani or the organic leviathans of the Threxian swarm. Their technology, while evolving at an alarming pace, lacked the refinement of those who had wielded it for millennia. And yet, they survived. Among them was Lieutenant Orion Voss, a man whose reputation was as contested as humanity's place in the galaxy. He was an explorer, an archaeologist of the void, drawn to the mysteries that others left buried. His superiors called him reckless. His peers called him brilliant. He called himself bored. That changed when the distress beacon pulsed through the vastness. It was an impossible signal, broadcasting from a star system that should have been devoid of life. Kalor 9 had been classified as a null sector, a place where fleets disappeared and probes returned hollow. No one knew why, and few dared to ask. The beacon was a whisper from something that had no right to speak. Orion answered. His vessel, the Argosy, was a sleek Terran scouting frigate, fast but fragile. It was meant for deep space reconnaissance, not direct conflict. He wasn't alone. Protocol demanded a multi-species escort for any classified anomaly. His crew had been paired with a detachment of Zivani officers, their towering, avian-like forms imposing even in silence. Among them was Commander Lyra Vex, a woman who regarded him with the same suspicion her people regarded humanity as a whole. When they arrived, they saw it. The warship, Valeth Prime. Its presence defied reason, a construct of seamless black metal suspended in a slow drift between Kalor 9's twin dead stars. It was unlike anything recorded, its architecture pulsing with something deeper than power, something awake. The Zivani recognized it immediately. It should not exist. The words came from Lyra, barely more than a whisper. She had seen its likeness in ancient records, heard the warnings pass through generations. This was no ship. It was a relic of the Eidolon, a species thought to have ascended eons ago. And it was soulbound, an enigma tied to its creators on a level no known. Technology could replicate, yet it responded. To him. The bridge of the Argosy was thick with tension. Every species present had their own way of interpreting the impossible, but fear was universal. Orion should have retreated, but something unshakable had taken root in his mind. A pull, a whisper in the static. The ship wanted something. Ignoring protocol, he boarded it, the Zivani protested. The Concordium would have forbid it. But Orion was human, and humanity had never been particularly good at heeding warnings. The interior was wrong. It was vast, far too vast. Space bent in ways that defied geometry. Corridors spiraling in shifting patterns, illuminated by veins of pulsing cyan light. There were no controls, no interfaces, only an awareness pressing against the edges of his mind, an intelligence vast and waiting. And then he touched the core. Pain, fire, light. It was not an interface. It was an understanding, raw and absolute. For the briefest moment, Orion saw the galaxy as it once was, ancient, warring, torn between gods and their abandoned creations. He saw the warship's purpose, its loneliness, its unfulfilled duty. It was bound to those long lost. It should have been impossible. Yet, it obeyed. The warship pulsed, its systems roaring to life, a resonance that sent tremors through space itself. The moment his mind linked with the core, the ship marked him as its own. The soul binding was complete, and the galaxy noticed. The warship had been claimed. By a human. The instant the connection was forged, the universe felt it. It rippled through, the void like a silent scream, a resonance that defied the laws of matter and time. Across the stars, ancient machines flickered to life, their long-dormant circuits pulsing with recognition. Forgotten beacons activated in systems untouched for millennia, sending out signals in languages no living being remembered. And at the center of it all, Orion Voss stood within the heart of Valeth Prime, his mind struggling to comprehend what he had just become. The warship wasn't merely responding to him, it was accepting him. On the Argosy, chaos erupted. The Zavani officers reacted first, their instincts honed by centuries of war and diplomacy. Lyra Vex's voice cut through the frantic chatter, her command sharp as a blade. Shut it down. But there was no shutting it down. A surge of power coursed through Valeth Prime, its dark hull shimmering as ancient runes lit up across its surface. The gravitational pull around it shifted, distorting the local space-time fabric. A deep, resonant filled the void, a soundless tremor that could be felt rather than heard. And then, the real horror began. The Concordium was listening. Aboard distant stations orbiting the galactic core, Concordium command relays flared with incoming data. The high executors, the ruling body of the vast interstellar alliance, gathered in haste. The reports were impossible. The Eidolon warship had awakened. Worse, it had chosen a human. Admiral Kethril of the Zavani Imperium, a veteran of countless conflicts, did not hesitate. He sent the order across every secured channel. The warship is a galactic threat. Orion Voss must be neutralized. Fleet mobilization was immediate. On Valeth Prime, Orion felt everything. The ship did not speak to him in words, nor did it obey like some mechanical servant. It was alive in a way that defied definition, a presence that thrummed in the marrow of his bones. It was relieved. It had been waiting. Memories that were not his own bled into his mind. Visions of the Eidolon, their luminous forms standing at the precipice of existence, their civilization stretching across eternity. They had built Valeth Prime not as a weapon, but as a guardian, a vessel meant to ascend alongside them. But something had gone wrong. The Eidolon had vanished, their legacy scattered into whispers, leaving Valeth Prime drifting through the abyss incomplete. Its soul-binding protocol had remained dormant, waiting for a mind capable of synchronizing with its vast intelligence. It should have been impossible. And yet, Orion stood at the heart of its control nexus, his thoughts bleeding into its circuits, his heartbeat syncing with its core. The warship did not see him as an invader. It saw him as its last chance. The first attack came without warning. A Zavani dreadnought, sleek and silver, dropped out of FTL, its weapons primed. It wasted no time. An annihilation lance fired directly at Valeth Prime, a beam designed to carve through planetary crusts. Orion had no time to react. But the warship did. Without command, without hesitation, Valeth Prime moved. Reality twisted. In an instant, the ship was elsewhere, shifting through space with impossible ease. It hadn't jumped. It had stepped, bending the laws of physics as if they were mere suggestions. The dreadnought's beam struck only empty void. A second later, Valeth Prime reappeared behind it and fired. A pulse of pure void energy erupted from its hull, a silent wave that engulfed the enemy vessel. The dreadnought didn't explode. It didn't break apart. It simply ceased to be, gone. Panic spread through the Concordium like wildfire. A human had just commanded a weapon that should not exist. Valith Prime was not a warship in the way the galaxy understood war. It did not fire missiles or plasma cannons. It did not rely on shields or armor. It unmade whatever it deemed an enemy, and it had just declared itself active. A kill order was issued. Every fleet capable of responding was diverted. Every political channel erupted in alarm, and in the depths of the void, the Eclipse Dominion took notice. The Dominion had waited for this moment. They had always suspected the Eidolon had left something behind, a key to the next stage of existence. They had scoured the remnants of precursor civilizations, experimenting on what little technology they could salvage. Now, they had confirmation, and they would take it. Vadran Kor, the enigmatic leader of the Dominion, watched the unfolding chaos with satisfaction. The Galactic Concordium would do exactly what he expected. They would panic. They would send their fleets. They would drive Orion Voss into desperation, and, when the time was right, the Dominion would strike. On Valith Prime, Orion struggled to regain control. The warship had acted on instinct, defending itself before he even understood the threat. But now he felt the weight of what had just happened. He had killed, not by choice, not even by command, but by being. The warship did not operate like a Terran vessel. There were no buttons to press, no interfaces to manage. It responded to thought, to intention, to emotion. And right now, it felt his fear. Lyra Vex's voice cut through the storm. "You need to run." Orion barely turned before the next fleet dropped into real space. This was no single ship. This was an armada, a formation of warships from half a dozen species, weapons locked on him. Their ultimatum was immediate: surrender the warship, or be destroyed. But Orion knew the truth. Even if he surrendered, even if he begged, even if he knelt before the might of the Concordium, they would never let him walk away. He had crossed a line that could never be undone. Humanity had just become more than a minor species in the grand game of galactic politics. They had just become a threat, and every power in the galaxy was now coming for him. The warship pulsed with quiet certainty. It was not afraid. It had waited eons for this moment. And as Orion braced himself for what was to come, he heard the words not in his ears but in his mind. "You are not alone." The weight of the void pressed against Orion Voss like a tightening noose. In every direction, the sky burned with the cold fire of warships, their hulls glinting against the abyss. The Galactic Concordium's armada had formed a blockade, positioning themselves like a wall between him and any possible escape. Fleets from a dozen species stood united in their purpose: to end the anomaly that was Valith Prime, or claim it, before anyone else could. Aboard their command ships, admirals and strategists debated their next move, voices filled with alarm and whispered desperation. A human had bonded with an Eidolon warship. No species, no empire, no god of war had ever wielded such power, yet here he was, a man, flesh and blood, standing at the helm of something beyond the understanding of an entire galaxy. It was unacceptable. Orion knew what was coming before the words even left their comms. "This is your final warning. Surrender. The warship or be annihilated." The threat rang hollow. Because Orion wasn't in control of Valith Prime, it was in control of him. A pulse of thought, a surge of memory. The warship's ancient consciousness stirred once more, reaching into Orion's mind, showing him glimpses of forgotten wars, of civilizations wiped from existence with the flicker of a dying star. It had fought before, and it could fight again. Orion's breathing was steady, but his heart pounded. He had seen what Valith Prime was capable of. He had felt the raw power of its presence, the way it had unmade the Zivani dreadnought as if it had never existed. He could give the command now. With a thought, with a whisper, he could erase every warship before him, reduce the Concordiums, proud fleets to nothing but echoes in the dark. The warship was waiting. No, Orion thought, forcing his will against the pulsing consciousness pressing into him. He would not be the spark that set the galaxy ablaze. But the galaxy did not share his restraint. The first shot came from the Dominion, A lance of searing crimson energy cut through the dark, arcing toward Valeth Prime like a spear aimed at the heart of a god. The Eclipse Dominion had no interest in negotiations. They had been watching, waiting for their moment, and now they struck with ruthless precision. Orion barely had time to react before the warship moved. No engines roared, no thrusters fired. Valeth Prime simply shifted, warping reality around it, reappearing behind the Dominion fleet in an instant. A lesser ship would have struggled to calculate the jump. Valeth Prime had done it as effortlessly as a breath. The Dominion's flagship barely had time to register the shift before the warship struck back, not with weapons, with something far worse. A wave of silence rippled outward, invisible, intangible, yet devastating. The Dominion fleet systems died in unison. No alarms, no explosions, just sudden, absolute quiet. Engines flickered out, shield generators collapsed, weapon systems shut down mid-charge. The Dominion fleet floated dead in the void. Valeth Prime had rejected their existence. Panic spread across the remaining Concordium forces. They had prepared for a battle of attrition. They had not prepared for this. This wasn't a warship. This was something else. Admiral Kethral's voice was a snarl through the open channel, masking the barely contained fear beneath his words. If we do not stop him now, none of us ever will. Another fleet moved in. Zivani, Threxian, Lor Van. They came with plasma torpedoes, railguns, kinetic harpoons designed to rip through capital ships like paper. Orion felt the warship's amusement. Dew had played this game before and it had never lost. Lyra Vex's voice cut through the madness. Orion, stop this. He turned, her Zivani figure illuminated by the pulsing blue glow of the ship's core. Her feathers were ruffled, her jaw set in something between anger and desperation. They'll never let you go, she said. Not after this? I didn't. Start this, Orion shot back. I didn't ask for any of this. They don't care. Her golden eyes bore into his. You bonded with something beyond our understanding. To them, that makes you a threat. She wasn't wrong. Orion clenched his fists, trying to will the warship to not kill, to not act in the only way it knew how. For the first time since the bond had been forged, he felt resistance. Valeth Prime did not want to run. It wanted to end this. The warship did not see politics. It did not see alliances or diplomacy. It saw threats, and threats were to be eliminated. Orion's mind strained against the ship's will. Not like this, he thought. He forced his intent through the connection, fighting against the ship's instincts. Valeth Prime hesitated. For the first time in eons, it hesitated, and in that hesitation, the trap was sprung. A new signature flared on the ship's sensors. Something moving fast, something wrong. From the depths of space, a Hunter-class dreadnought emerged, its hull etched with runes of stolen Eidolon technology, the Eclipse Dominion's true weapon. Vadran Kor had been waiting for this moment. A parasitic spike shot from the dreadnought's underbelly, latching onto Valeth Prime before the ship could phase away. For the first time, Valeth Prime screamed. It was not a sound, but a shockwave that rippled through Orion's very soul. Pain. Fire. Something foreign burrowing into the warship's mind, trying to corrupt it, to steal its will. Dominion wasn't here to destroy it, they were here to take it. Orion's vision blurred. The bond flickered, the connection between him and Valeth Prime growing unstable. The ship was fighting back, but the parasite was designed for this purpose. A weapon engineered from stolen precursor knowledge. Something crafted for the sole purpose of overriding an Eidolon construct. He felt the warship's pain. For the first time, he felt it afraid, and in that moment, Orion made a choice. If Valeth Prime was his, truly his, then he would not let them take it. He reached deeper into the bond, not just feeling the warship's mind, commanding it. He pushed back. The parasite writhed. The warship shook. The Dominion dreadnought systems flickered, its stolen technology turning against itself, and then the parasite broke. A final pulse of energy erupted from Valeth Prime, shattering the Dominion's weapon in an instant. The dreadnought imploded, its hull crumbling inward as its stolen power turned to ash. The Concordium fleet stopped. For a long, terrible moment, no one moved. The impossible had happened again. Orion had not just bonded with Valeth Prime, he had mastered it. The war was over before it began. But Orion knew the truth. This was not victory. This was only the beginning, because somewhere in the depths of the galaxy, others had been watching. And soon, they would come. For him, for Valeth Prime, for the future of everything. The silence that followed was the kind that only existed in the void, deep, unbroken, and filled with the weight of impossible things. The Concordium fleet held position, their weapons still locked on Valeth Prime, but they did not fire. They had seen what the warship could do. They had seen it unmake an armada without a single explosion, watched it erase an entire Dominion dreadnought, as though it had never existed, and they had seen something even worse. Orion Voss hadn't just bonded with the ship. He had commanded it. No one, not the high executors of the Concordium, not the warlords of the Dominion, not the exiled scholars who whispered of lost Eidolon secrets, had believed this was possible. Yet here he was. A human. A man standing on the bridge of a warship that should not exist, staring down the most powerful empires in the known galaxy. The warship's core pulsed beneath his hands, its rhythm matching his own. It was no longer just a machine. It was a presence, a part of him as much as his own thoughts. He felt its awareness stretching out, scanning the fleets before them, sensing their hesitation, their fear, their desperation. It wanted to end this, to finish what it had started, to remove all threats. But Orion held firm. No more killing. The warship resisted, pushing against him, testing the limits of his will. It was not accustomed to hesitation. It did not know diplomacy or strategy or fear. It knew only its purpose, and its purpose had always been war. Then came the message, a single transmission, cutting through the static, overriding every secured frequency, a voice old and knowing, filled with the weight of history. Human. Orion's breath stilled. This was not a Concordium admiral, not a Dominion warlord. It was something older. The fleet around them shifted, their movements tightening, almost defensive. They had expected conflict. They had not expected this. Lyra Vex stiffened beside him, her feathers ruffled in unease. That signal, it's coming from outside the system. Orion narrowed his eyes. From where? She hesitated. Then, everywhere, and the warship whispered in his mind. They have awakened. The space around them cracked. Not a jump. Not a warp. Something different. From the edges of perception they arrived. Ships unlike anything in the known galaxy. Structures that shimmered in and out of existence, bending light around their impossible angles. They did not move with engines, did not operate by any known physics. They simply were. And at the center of them, a single entity materialized. Tall, luminous, its form shifting between what the mind could perceive and what it refused to understand. The Eidolon had returned. Orion felt them before he saw them. A weight in his mind, an awareness so vast it made his own thoughts feel like sparks against an eternal storm. They did not speak through words nor through sound. They spoke through understanding. The knowledge hit him all at once, a flood of images, concepts, truths that had been buried beneath time. The Eidolon had never truly vanished. They had ascended, transcended, the limits of mortality, of time, of space itself. But before they had left, they had created Valeth Prime. Not as a weapon, not as a tool of destruction, but as a gatekeeper, a key to something greater, a test. And Orion Voss had passed it. The Concordium panicked. Admiral Kethral's voice was a sharp bark across the comms. Fall back, all forces, regroup, immediately. But it was too late. The Eidolon reached out and the fleets froze, not in space, not in motion, in time. Every ship, Every soldier, every mind trapped in a single frozen moment, except for Orion, except for Valeth Prime, except for the Eidolon's gaze, now fixed upon him. And then, for the first time, they truly spoke. The cycle must end. Orion staggered. His mind burned with their words. His very being stretched across the weight of their intent. The warship pulsed in warning. They were not offering him a choice. The truth revealed. The Eidolon had seen this before. Across countless civilizations, across untold millennia, there had always been one species, one empire, one force that reached the threshold, that stood at the precipice of something greater, and every time they failed. Every time, they turned to war. The Eidolon had created Valeth Prime as a final test, a last chance for any species that touched its power. If they could master it, truly master it without succumbing to destruction, then they would be worthy. But none had succeeded. Until now. Until humanity. Orion's breath was ragged. He felt the enormity of the moment pressing down on him, the sheer scale of what was being asked. The warship could be the bridge to something greater, or the weapon that ended everything. The final choice. The final choice. The Eidolon extended their will toward him. The choice was his. To leave this galaxy behind, to ascend beyond the limits of flesh and time, to walk among them, or to remain. To wield Valeth Prime as a guardian, to stand against the inevitable tide of destruction, to ensure that humanity did not fall as so many had before. The warship's core pulsed beneath him, waiting. Lyra Vex's voice was quiet. You don't have to do this. But they both knew the truth. He did. Because, if he left, if he ascended, then who would stand between the galaxy and those who would use this power for war? Orion Voss closed his eyes and made his choice. The aftermath, the Eidolon understood. They did not argue. They did not persuade. They simply accepted. The impossible ships faded from existence, vanishing into the beyond. The fleets of the Concordium stirred, the frozen moment unraveling as time resumed its course. Admiral Kethral's voice was a whisper. What? What happened? Orion exhaled, the weight of his choice settling over him. The warship was his now, not just its power, but its purpose. The Concordium. Forces did not fire. The Dominion did not move. No one wanted to test the man who had just spoken to gods. Lyra Vex stepped beside him, her gaze unreadable. So, she said softly. What now? Orion looked out at the void, at the endless stars, beyond, at the wars still to come. He tightened his grip on the warship's core and smiled. We make sure no one ever misuses this power again. The void was different now. The weight of the Eidolon's departure still lingered, an absence that could be felt in the very fabric of space. Their presence had bent reality, held the universe in suspended breath. Now the stars felt smaller, the darkness deeper. But Orion Voss remained, and so did Valeth Prime. The fleets of the galactic Concordium held their position, weapons armed, yet motionless. They had just witnessed something that should not have been possible. A human had stood before an ancient intelligence, had refused the path of ascension, and now he remained among them. What did that make him? What did that make humanity? The open comms were silent, but Orion knew what was happening behind them. Admirals whispered in their command chambers. Concordium strategists debated their next move. Some argued to attack now, to strike before Orion had time to consolidate his power. Others urged restraint, seeing in him not a conqueror but something far more dangerous, an unknown. Because Orion Voss was no longer just a pilot. He was the soul-bound commander of a warship that could erase fleets, bend time, rewrite reality itself. And he had chosen to stay, which meant he had chosen a side. Lyra Vex watched him from across the warship's control chamber, her golden eyes unreadable. You should run, he exhaled. No. They won't stop coming. I know. A flicker of something in her gaze, something that might have been respect. You could have left, she said. You could have walked away from all of this. I could have. The warship pulsed beneath his hands, alive, waiting for his will. But I didn't. Because if he left, if he turned his back on the galaxy now, then what? The Eclipse Dominion would strike again, desperate for power. The Concordium would move to contain him, fearing what they could not control. And worse still, he could feel something stirring in the deep void, something neither the Dominion nor the Concordium understood. The Eidolon had called it the cycle. Civilizations rose, warred, fell. Again and again. A pattern repeated across the history of time itself. He had a choice: to let it continue, or to break it. The first transmission came from the Concordium. Admiral Kethral's voice was cold steel wrapped in caution. Human, you have claimed a power that no species was meant to wield. You must stand down. Surrender the warship. Submit to Concordium authority. Orion almost laughed. Or what? A long silence. Then, if you do not, you will be seen as an enemy of galactic stability. That word churned in his thoughts. Stability, as in control. Stability, as in keeping humanity in its place. Stability, as in ensuring no species ever dared to reach beyond what the Concordium allowed. Orion clenched his fists. He had spent years watching humans scrape for scraps at the Concordium's table, watching the older species dictate what they could and couldn't do. And now here he stood, proving that their rules no longer applied. He opened the comms. No. The warship hummed, responding to his resolve. I am not surrendering. I am not submitting. And if you try to take this from me, I will show you exactly why the Eidolon left this ship in the hands of a human. A ripple of hesitation moved through the fleets. Orion saw it in the way their ships adjusted course. Subtle, uncertain. They were afraid. Good. But fear alone wouldn't hold them back forever. They would regroup. They would strategize. They would come for him again, whether in months or years, unless he gave them something else to fear. The warship's systems pulsed, its intelligence shifting in response to Orion's intent. He didn't need to destroy them. He needed to make them rethink. Everything a single thought sent Valeth Prime into motion. Not an attack, not a retreat. Something worse. A demonstration. Across the sector, every artificial system flickered. Starbases powered down. Warships lost connection to their targeting arrays. Entire fleets went dark. The warship had severed them, cut them off from their own technology, from the networks that bound their civilizations together. It lasted only 5 seconds, but in that time, Orion had proved a point. This was not a weapon they could simply fight. This was something beyond them, something that chose whether they existed or not, and it had chosen to let them live. The message was clear. Orion Voss had not declared war. He had declared independence. A new power had risen, not a fleet, not an empire, but a single warship bound to a single man, standing at the threshold of history. And every species in the galaxy would have to decide. Would they fear him? Or would they follow him? The Concordium fleets withdrew. One by one they turned, breaking formation, their commanders silent. Orion knew they weren't surrendering. They were waiting, watching, because the game had changed. And now they had to decide their next move. Lyra Vex exhaled, tension draining from her shoulders. You just made yourself the most dangerous man in the galaxy, Orion smiled. I was always dangerous. The warship thrummed beneath his feet, its intelligence shifting, settling. He could feel it now, the vast unknown beyond the stars. The next move was his, and this time, for the first time in history, it belonged to humanity. The void stretched endlessly before him, untouched, unbroken. Orion Voss stood at the helm of Valeth Prime, staring into the infinite unknown. Behind him, the Concordium had retreated, their fleets pulling back to the safety of their borders. They feared him now, Not just the warship. Him. A single human had done what no species had ever managed, claimed the power of an Eidolon relic and survived to wield it. But power was never the end of the story. It was only the beginning. The warship pulsed beneath him, its presence a constant whisper in his thoughts. It had chosen him, bonded with him, but even now he felt its curiosity. The war was over, for now. But the ship was still searching, for something more, for what came next. Lyra Vex stood at his side, arms crossed, her Zivani form still tense despite the silence of space. "So," she said, her voice unreadable, "what's your plan, Warlord?" Orion smirked at the title, but there was no amusement in his eyes. "Not a warlord," he murmured. "Not yet." She shook her head. "The Concordium won't let this stand. The Dominion won't either. Even if they leave you alone today, they'll come back. With more fleets, more weapons, more desperation." "I know. And you don't seem worried." "I'm not." Because Orion had seen something more. He had glimpsed the truth buried in Valeth Prime's memories, in the whisper of the Eidolon's final words. The cycle. The endless rise and fall of civilizations. The wars that burned across the stars. The empires that believed they would last forever until they didn't. This was not just about him. It was about what came next. For humanity. For the entire galaxy. And he would not sit idly by and wait for it to happen. The ship shifted beneath his feet, its power humming in resonance with his thoughts. It was not built for war, not truly. It had been designed as a gatekeeper, a test, a warning, a key to something beyond the limits of what anyone understood. And now, for the first time, it had found a pilot who did not seek war, nor power, nor conquest. It had found someone who wanted to break the cycle. Orion clenched his fists. It was time to go beyond. Final transmission. Logged. The soulbound warship shouldn't exist. But neither should the man who claimed it. Let's see what else they were wrong about.